The first box with Mara's name on it arrived at 1:13 in the morning, almost 4 hours before anyone realized she was missing. That was the first moment I understood there was something wrong with Bell County's Evidence Annex. Not old building wrong, not budget cutting wrong, something older than that, something patient. I had been alone for most of the shift, sitting under the fluorescent lights with a headset on, digitizing intake forms from the late 90s, while the building settled around me like it was trying to go back to sleep. The annex sat behind the courthouse in a separate concrete block building with no windows on the first floor and a loading dock nobody used anymore because the chain had rusted in place years ago. At night, the place had 3 sounds: the lights humming overhead, the climate control coughing through the vents, and every now and then, the service lift in the back hallway giving a tired little ding like it had expected someone to step out. I was not supposed to be working by myself that week, but county payroll had frozen 2 temp positions and Mara had the day shift she refused to trade. So it was just me, a half-drunk cup of burnt coffee, and the laminated rule card taped under my monitor. Ruth Weller had left that card years earlier, back when she ran the annex. Nobody else took it seriously. It was written in neat blue ink, the kind old clerks used when they think paper deserves better than ballpoint. If a box appears on the intake card after midnight, do not stamp it until sunrise. If a box has no chain of custody signature, do not open it alone. If you hear the service lift, check the camera before you check the hall. The first time Mara showed it to me, she laughed and said Ruth had spent 40 years in government storage and finally went a little theatrical. But at 1:13, when the ding sounded from the back hall, I still looked up like the card had called my name. The hallway camera sat in the corner of my monitor grid, grainy, black and white, too much glare from the emergency bulb at the far end. The intake cart had been empty a second earlier. Now, there was a gray archive box sitting on it, tied with a red evidence string. No person, no open door, no shape moving out of frame, just the box. I remember standing so fast my chair rolled back into the shelves. The camera image didn't change. The cart stayed there. The box stayed there. Red string bright as a cut in the black and white feed. I should have called someone. Instead, I went into the hall. That's the part I've replayed most since then. Not because it was brave, because it was stupid, an ordinary way people are stupid when something impossible first happens to them. Your brain refuses to promote it to danger. A prank, you think. A clerical mistake. Somebody's late-night drop-off. The back hall smelled like chilled dust and wet cardboard. The service liftgate was shut. The cart stood under the wall clock, and the clock read 1:14. There was no tag on the handle, no courier sheet clipped to the lid, just the box, neat and centered, like someone had placed it there for a photograph. I untied the red string. Inside was an intake sheet, an evidence envelope, a motel key with a plastic blue fob, and a printed photograph of a front porch. I knew that porch. White railing, one fake fern, porch light tilted slightly left, Mara's house. I looked at the intake sheet again. Case status, missing person, open. Name, Mara Saladou. Date filed, 10/14. It was still the 13th. I called her before I even realized I was moving. She picked up on the fourth ring, voice thick with sleep and irritation. Owen? Mara, are you home? A pause. What kind of question is that? I had to sit down on the floor because my knees suddenly felt unreliable. Just answer me. Yes, I'm home. Why do you sound like that? I looked from the photo to the hallway cam feed on my monitor, then back to the porch and the picture. Same angle, same dead mum that had never recovered from the summer heat. Same number plate by the door. Lock your door, I said. What? Lock your back door and don't go outside if you hear anything. Now she was awake. I could hear fabric rustling and her footsteps crossing hardwood. Owen, what is going on? I'll explain it in the morning. Explain now. But I was already looking at the evidence envelope. Someone had written silver chain, house key, vehicle fob across the front. Inside, nestled in a separate plastic sleeve, were a silver chain, a house key, a vehicle fob. Mara, is your chain on? My what? The silver chain you always wear. Silence. Then much quieter. No. My mouth went dry. Check your purse. A drawer opened. Something fell. Mara swore under her breath. My keys are gone. We stayed on the phone until she checked every room in her house. Nobody was there. Nothing else seemed missing. At 6:07 that morning, Mara stopped answering. By 8:30, she still hadn't come in. That was unusual enough on its own. Mara was the kind of person who texted if she was going to be 90 seconds late. She color-coded her lunch containers. She once apologized to a vending machine after hitting the wrong button. I was waiting in the front lot when Deputy Evan Pike pulled up. Pike and I had gone to school together. He had the same broad shoulders now that he had at 16, and the same curious way of talking to people, like he expected any sentence might turn into paperwork. Mara had missed a scheduled record transfer with the sheriff's office, and her supervisor had called it in. When I waved him over, he took one look at my face and said, "You look terrible. I found something last night." Okay. It had Mara's name on it. He waited. It was a missing person intake box. Pike squinted at me against the morning glare. Oh, what? I told him. Not all of it at first, just enough to hear how insane it sounded out loud. By the time I got to the photo of Mara's porch, he had one hand on his belt and the kind of careful expression cops used when they're deciding whether someone's in danger or just unraveling in front of them. Show me, he said. The box was there I had left it in, sealed again, and locked in my office cabinet. Pike opened it, checked the photograph, checked the intake sheet, then looked over the timestamp on the building login report I had already printed out. You're saying this was here before she disappeared? I'm saying she answered the phone when I called her. He lifted the vehicle fob by its ring. That isn't proof of anything on its own. No, I said, but the chain and the keys were gone before she knew they were gone. That got his attention. He bagged the contents again and called Mara's house. No answer. He called her cell. No answer. Then he asked the question I'd been avoiding asking myself since sunrise. Who else knew you'd be here alone? I almost said nobody. Then I remembered the weekly staff sheet on the break room board, the open office door, the fact that county buildings are full of people who knew where every person is without ever seeming to look. Half the building, I said. We checked the back hallway camera together. At 1:12, the cart was empty. At 1:13, the feed jumped once. A burst of static rippled through the image. At 1:13, 2 seconds, the box was there. Pike stared at the screen for a long time, the way people stare at magic tricks when they'd rather be angry than impressed. That camera's old, he said finally. It didn't glitch anywhere else. He didn't answer. Mara's car turned up just after lunch in a grocery store parking lot, 2 miles away from her house. Locked purse on the passenger seat. No sign of a struggle. No sign of Mara. Pike said if the fob had really been in the envelope before sunrise, whoever had it could have moved the car without touching her purse. Pike stopped treating me like I'm having a breakdown after that. He still didn't believe the box had appeared out of nowhere, but he believed it mattered. That night, he left a patrol unit idling outside the annex until midnight. At 12:17, the patrol car got called to a wreck on Route 8. At 1:13, the service lift dinged again. This time, I did what the rule card said. I checked the camera before I checked the hall. The cart appeared empty. Then the static ran across the image, soft as a breath on glass. When the picture cleared, another gray box sat on the metal shelf of the cart. I don't remember deciding to call Pike. I only remember whispering his name hard enough that it sounded like a prayer. He answered on the second ring. What happened? It's here again. Do not touch it. I'm not touching it. That was a lie. My hand was already on the doorknob. The second box was heavier than the first. Inside was a motel room card sleeve from the Blue Spruce Lodge, a torn section from a cheap windbreaker, with the name Kessler stitched on the cloth tag, and a once folded road map with a circle around an access road north of town. The intake sheet read, name, Brent Kessler, status, pending recovery. Pike got there 13 minutes later and took one look at the sheet before saying, pending recovery isn't a category. It is tonight. He didn't laugh. He called it in. At 4:40 in the morning, dispatch got the missing persons report. Brent Kessler, 46. Last seen checking out the Blue Spruce Lodge just after midnight. Pike drove to the access road at dawn. He found a matching windbreaker hanging from a split rail fence half a mile in. One sleeve torn away. No Kessler. No blood. No obvious tracks. Just a patch of flattened grass and smell Pike described later as cold pennies and standing water. That was when he asked to see every sealed case the annex was digitizing from the late 90s through the early 2000s. The request bounced back denied. Not by a judge, by Ruth Weller. On paper, Ruth was retired, 72, temporary consultant on records retention. The sheriff's office had never revoked her retention authority, so sealed cases requests still routed through her consultant login. She was the kind of person who wore scarf pins and sensible shoes, and probably still balanced her checkbook by hand. In courthouse buildings, that meant she wore more power than half the elected officials. Mara had once described her as the only person alive who can make a hallway feel audited. When Pike told me Ruth had blocked the request, I felt something small and hard shift loose in my stomach, because I knew that name for another reason. My mother had worked under Ruth Weller. And my mother had died in the old courthouse records basement, connected to the annex, when I was 10 years old. I don't talk about my mother much, mostly because Bell County never really agreed on how she died. The official version was an electrical fire in the old courthouse records basement, small, contained, tragic, because Caroline Mercer had gone back in alone to retrieve sealed juvenile files. The unofficial version changed depending on who was telling it. She was covering for somebody. She was stealing. She was unstable after the divorce. She smoked, which wasn't true. She knew things she shouldn't have known, which probably was. My clearest memory of her is not from the fire. It's from the annex break room 2 weeks before she died. She was leaning over a yellow legal pad while I ate crackers from a vending machine sleeve. She kept glancing towards the hallway like she was expecting the walls to start listening. When she caught me watching her, she flipped the paper over and smiled too quickly. "Rule for working in records," she said. "Never trust a file that already knows the ending." I thought about that line a lot after the second box. It could help me to get into the old intake ledgers anyway, just not through the official requests. The annex still had a side room the scanners couldn't safely process yet, where the oldest books were stacked flat in acid-free sleeves, waiting for restoration. Mara had been cataloging them before she disappeared. Her neat little paper flags still stuck out of a half a dozen volumes like white feather. By then I had been awake for almost 30 hours, and everyone in the room seemed too sharply outlined. Paper edges, dust in the strip light, the smell of old glue and mildew. Pike stood watch by the door while I lifted the first ledger onto the foam cradle. I found my mother's handwriting on page 11. Not a whole entry, just a note in the margin beside a case from 1999. Provisional inventory received 10 hours before event. Below that, the final intake had been pasted over it. On the next flag case, same thing. Different victim, same note. Then another, and another. Some of the names had never made local news in a meaningful way. 2 drifters, a waitress who had moved through town and vanished, a teenage boy from a church group, a highway maintenance worker, the kind of people whose disappearances became weather in a county like ours, mentioned, regretted, absorbed. Every one of them had a thin rectangle of adhesive discoloration where an earlier form had been removed. Every one of them had my mother's margin note. By the 6th case, Pike stopped pretending this was an interesting clerical anomaly. What exactly was she saying, he asked. That somebody was boxing evidence before the crime happened. Pike rubbed his face. That's impossible. I know. You keep saying that like it helps. It doesn't help. We found Ruth Weller's initials on supervisor approvals all through those pages. Not on every case. Only the sealed ones. Only the ones connected to a task force. Shorthand I had never heard before. Northline. Pike photographed everything and told me not to touch another book until he could get the proper authority. I promised I would leave when he did. I meant it for maybe 30 seconds. Then he left because the sheriff had called him in. I stayed. That was my second mistake. The first dead air call came in at 1:13 the following night. No number, just silence. And a low, tape hiss, like an old cassette had been held up to the mouthpiece. I almost hung up. Then very softly, a woman said, "Everything belongs somewhere." The line went dead. I knew that voice, not because I'd heard it recently, because it had been the voice in the background of my childhood, correcting my homework, telling me not to run indoors, laughing once in a while when she forgot not to. My mother. I called back even though there was no number to return. Then I called Pike. Then I sat at my desk with both hands flat against the wood until the shaking in them passed. At 1:13, the service lift dinged. I checked the camera. No box. For a second, I thought maybe that was worse. Then my office printer woke up behind me. The machine had worked properly in months. It still made copies too dark on one side and jammed if you fed anything heavier than plain paper. But that night, it came to life smoothly, with the soft mechanical certainty of something carrying out a command it had been waiting for to receive for years. One page slid into the tray, then another, then a third. All old intake forms. All forms sealed, north-lined cases. And on the last page, centered in my mother's careful handwriting, "Owen, if Ruth finds the duplicates, do not go down with her." I stared at the evidence until the letters stopped feeling like language. Then I ran back to the hall. The cart was empty. The lift gate was closed. But for the first time since I'd taken the job, I noticed something I should have noticed sooner. Fresh scratches on the concrete under the cartwheel, as if it had been moved more often than the dust pattern suggested. And behind the gate, just visible through the lattice, a lower call button polished bright by repeated use. I heard footsteps then, not in front of me, behind me. I turned so fast my shoulders hit the wall. No one was there, but the office at the end of the hall, the one Ruth Weller used during retention weeks, had its doors standing open by 3 inches. The light inside was on. I knew she wasn't supposed to be in the building after 6. I also knew I was past the point of making sensible choices. Her office smelled like starch and lavender, and those chalky peppermints old people keep in crystal bowls. The desk was clean except for a legal pad, one county seal stamp, and a photograph in a brass frame. Ruth standing in front of the annex in 1998. My mother beside her, both women smiling for the camera. My mother looked tired. Ruth looked satisfied. Under the frame lay a single motel key with a blue plastic fob. Blue Spruce Lodge, room 12. The key that had been missing from Kessler's card sleeve. A voice spoke from behind me. "You should never enter another clerk's office without knocking." I turned. Ruth Weller stood in the doorway in a gray coat. I hadn't heard her approach. Her white hair was pinned back so tightly it seemed to sharpen her whole face. For one insane second, I almost felt relieved, because whatever I had imagined, whatever impossible shape the last 3 nights had taken in my mind, Ruth was just a woman, small, dry-eyed, elderly. Then I saw the red evidence string looped neatly around her wrist, like a bracelet. "I didn't hear you come in," I said. "No," she said, "you usually don't." Her gaze moved to the photograph, then back to me. You've been opening things that were not addressed to you. They had my coworker's name on them, and yet you opened them. I don't know what expression crossed my face, but she smiled very slightly, not kindly. Your mother was the same way, she said. No patience for procedure. Where's Mara? Ruth tipped her head, as if evaluating whether the question deserved an answer. You really don't remember much, do you? Memory moved then, not clearly, but like something shifting under dark water. A hallway, a bell ringing below my feet, my mother's hand gripping my wrist hard enough to hurt. Don't follow that sound, she was saying. Not if I'm not with you. Do you understand me? When I was a child, I said slowly, I used to come here at night. You used to sleepwalk, Ruth said. Still do, apparently. The room tilted for a second. What? She nodded toward the security monitor at her desk. I hadn't noticed it. Newer than the rest. Private feed. Timestamp active. Ruth pressed one button and the image rewound to the previous night. There I was, at 1:12, walking down the back hall in my own clothes, face blank, bare feet, pale against the concrete. I stopped at the lift gate. Waited, then it opened. I disappeared inside. A minute later, I emerged pushing the intake cart with the second box already on it. I had no memory of it. Then I noticed the wall clock reflected in the office glass. Its hand still read 12:58. The second hand moved backwards every few ticks. Whatever Ruth was showing me, it was not the same clean hallway feed Pike and I had watched. My stomach clenched so hard, I thought I might be sick on her spotless floor. Ruth watched me carefully. There, she said, almost gently. Now you see the problem. I left her office without another word, though I don't remember making the decision to do it. One moment, I was staring at footage of myself wheeling a box that should not have existed. The next, I was in my car with the doors locked, parked behind a closed gas station 2 streets over, trying to breathe through the feeling that my body had become untrustworthy. Pike answered on the first ring. Tell me you're not alone. I'm alone. Great, I love that. I told him about the footage. He was quiet for long enough that I thought the line had dropped. Finally he said, come to the station. No. Owen, if that video is real and I've been moving those boxes in my sleep, then either somebody is using me or I'm... Don't finish that sentence. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel. It smelt faintly like dust and summer heat, though the night outside had gone cold. She had a private camera feed, I said, and the missing motel key from Kessler's card sleeve in her desk. That I can work with. She also said my mother was the same way. Pike exhaled slowly. Go home. Lock your door. Don't drink anything you didn't open yourself. I'll see what I can pull on Weller before morning. I should have listened to him. Instead, I went back to the annex. There's a point in certain stories where the sensible version of your life ends, and after that, every choice you make belongs to the story and not to the person you thought you were at the beginning. For me, that point was walking back through the annex door at 12:58 because I couldn't stand the idea of Ruth staying in that building alone with my mother's notes. I went to the back hall and unplugged the main camera. Then I sat on the floor beside the service lift with my phone flashlight off. and waited in the dark. At 1:13, the bell dinged below me. A memory came with it. Not clear, not complete, but enough. I was small again, sitting on the concrete steps while my mother crouched in front of me. "If you hear that sound," she told me, "count to 50 before you move. Promise me." I had asked why. She looked over her shoulder toward the floor below and said, "Because some people think if they file a thing neatly enough, God won't notice what it is." The lift started to rise. Metal chain whispering, motor struggling. When the gate shuttered open, no box sat inside. Just a third gray container on the floor of the cage, tied with a red string, as if whoever had sent it wanted me to step in to claim it. I counted to 50 anyway. At 31, I heard Ruth's office door click shut. At 50, I stepped into the lift. The box was addressed to me, Owen Mercer. Status unresolved. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the lid. Inside were my apartment spare key, the burned orange mug from my kitchen sink, and the photograph of me asleep at my desk in the annex, taken from no more than 6 feet away. Under that was a microcassette and a clear sleeve labeled Home Copy. I had recorded in my office for dictation logs. I went there, locked the door, and played it. For 3 seconds, all I heard was tape hiss. Then my mother spoke. Not young, not casual, low and tight, every word pressed down like she knew paper and tape could betray her if she gave them too much. She uses the lift bell because she knows you'll follow it. You began sleepwalking after the first time she took you downstairs. You were too little to understand what you saw. I thought I could keep it from you. I was wrong. Something scraped outside of my office door very softly. I froze. The tape kept turning. The duplicates are not in the records room. That is where she will expect you to look. When you were 10, you hid where children hide when adults forget they can fit somewhere small. If you remember the smell of wet cement, you remember the rest. A pause. I could hear my mother draw one careful breath. If Ruth ever puts your name on a box, it means she cannot find what I left. The scraping came again, then footsteps. Slow, measured, passing my door. My mother's voice on the tape had gone soft now. Do not let her file you. Do not let her decide what happened. And if Mara is with you... The tape cut out in a burst of static. Mara. I called her even though I knew she couldn't answer. Straight to voicemail. I called Pike. Straight to voicemail. Then from somewhere in the building below me, I heard a woman scream once. Not loud, not long, but human in the way alarms and hinges and machinery never are. I was moving before the echo died. The old sub-basement entrance had been sealed since the fire, at least officially. The public map ended one floor above it, but with my mother's words scraping at the inside of my skull, children hide where adults forget they can fit somewhere small. I suddenly knew exactly where to look. In the old restoration room, there was a row of flat map drawers waist high against the far wall. I yanked them open, one by one, until I found the one warped one that never closed flush. Behind it, hidden by years of rolled survey sheets, was a narrow maintenance hatch. When I pulled it open, damp, cold air hit my face. Wet cement, rust, and underneath both, that cold metallic smell I'd been trying not to name since Pike mentioned it on the access road. There were concrete stairs behind the hatch, steep and unlit. I went down with my phone in one hand and the dictation recorder in the other, because some desperate part of me still believed that if I recorded enough of this, it would become manageable. Evidence, not nightmare. At the bottom, the beam of my phone found old brick quarter mouths that did not appear on any public map. Past them were shelves, rows and rows of metal shelving disappearing into dark. Not record shelves, evidence shelves. Gray archive boxes, stacked in perfect columns, each tied with the same red string. Some were labeled with old case numbers, some with names I recognized from the ledgers, some with no names at all. And at the center of the room, under a single lamp, sat a desk, a typewriter, county seal stamp, index cards drying on a rack, a kettle humming on a hot plate like someone had made a home out of a procedure. "Mara?" I said. My voice came back to me in pieces. Then I heard beneath to my left and swung the light toward it. She was inside an old chain-link property cage, wrist zip-tied in front of her, mouth uncovered, face pale, with the fury more than fear. "Owen," she hissed, "do not say another word." I crossed to her, but she shook her head sharply and glanced behind me. Too late. Ruth Weller stepped out from between the shelves holding a ring of keys and a short black flashlight. No knife, no gun. Somehow that made it worse. "You were always curious," she said. The sub-basement gave her voice a church-like echo. I turned to face her and kept myself between her and Mara's cage. "What is this?" Ruth looked around the room as if I had asked an ungrateful question. "Order. This is where you took them. This is where they were understood." The anger I had been running on for days changed sharp then, lost heat, became something colder. "You filed people." Ruth's expression didn't move. People vanish every day. Most of them vanish badly, randomly, pointlessly. They leave behind mess, contradiction, lies. Here, at least, there's sequence. Behind me, Mara made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh if terror hadn't got to it first. "You're sick," she said. Ruth's eyes flicked to her. That word is what people use when they want order to excuse itself. She looked back at me. Your mother understood more than she admitted. That was her problem. She could see the beauty of a complete record, but lacked the discipline to finish one. I took a step away, trying to angle closer to Mara's cage without making it obvious. "You killed her." Ruth considered that. "Your mother chose fire over filing." I did not light the match in her hand. I still don't know whether that was a lie, a half-truth, or the exact kind of answer people like Ruth prefer because it lets them live comfortably inside their own grammar. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "The duplicate ledger." I said nothing. Ruth smiled for the second time since I had known her. Thin, certain. "Heard the tape, did you?" Caroline was sentimental enough to hide instructions. She always assumed blood would beat habit. She lifted the keys slightly. You came down here because you remembered where you hid things as a child. Wet cement, narrow spaces. That was clever of her, using your fear as a filing system. I thought of the map drawers. The wrapped one. The place I had already looked because she told me to. No, not there. She said that was where Ruth would expect me to look. Children hide where adults forget they can fit somewhere small. My eyes went to the property cage. Not the one Mara was in. The narrow gap behind it, between chain link and wall, where old intake tags had blown and gathered in a paper drift, just wide enough once, maybe for a 10-year-old boy to squeeze into and tuck something under loose concrete. Ruth saw the shift in my face and her own expression shifted. There are moments when two people realize they are both about to lie with their whole bodies. She moved first. Not fast for a woman her age. Fast for certainty. I went for the cage instead of the gap, slamming my shoulder into the door hard enough to rattle the latch, while Mara threw her bound hands through the opening toward the key ring. Ruth swung the flashlight at my temple. White pain burst across one side of my face. I staggered, grabbed the hot plate off the desk by instinct, and threw it, not at her, at the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room. The kettle hit concrete and screamed steam. Mara shouted my name. Ruth's voice, somewhere close to my right, suddenly furious for the first time. You spoiled little thing. I dropped low and crawled, hands slipping over cold floor and paper scraps. Somewhere ahead, I found the chain link edge of the empty gap behind the cage and shoved myself into it shoulder first. My fingers touched loose mortar. I tore at it. Chunks crumbled. My nails hit metal. A tin box no bigger than a lunch pail slid free into my hands, just as Ruth's flashlight beam cut across the dark and found my legs. There you are, she said. I rolled out, clutching the tin box to my chest. Ruth lunged and caught my coat sleeve, but Mara, still half bound, kicked the cage door into Ruth's knee with everything she had. Ruth went down hard enough for the keys to scatter. I grabbed one, found Mara's zip tie with my shaking hands, and sawed it against the jagged edge of a bent shelf bracket. She had already worked the plastic halfway against the chain link. I twisted where she had weakened it until it split. Run, Mara gasped. We did. The shelves turned the dark into a maze. Boxes bumped and toppled as we pushed past them. Somewhere behind us, Ruth kept calling, not yelling now, but speaking in the same clipped office voice. You don't understand what you're carrying. Then louder. You think the county wants truth? The county wants paper. At the foot of the stairs, Mara nearly slipped. I shoved the tin box at her and went back 3 steps because a thought had hit me like a dropped ceiling tile. The recorder, I still had it. I jammed rewind and pressed play. My mother's voice poured into the stairwell, thin and warped by bad tape, but unmistakable. If anything happens to me, Ruth Weller maintained provisional inventories in advance of disappearances tied to Northland supervisor approvals. Sheriff Coulter knows this. He approved storage below the annex. The tape ripped into static as something struck me from behind. I hit the step on one knee and turned. Ruth stood 3 stairs below, one hand on the railing, breathing hard. Her neat hair had become loose on one side, making her look less wild than tired, which felt somehow more frightening. "Give me the ledger," she said. Above us, somewhere on the main floor, a door slammed. Men shouting. Pike's voice, distant but coming closer. Ruth heard it too. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. She looked at me, then at the recorder in my hand, then at the dark below, as if measuring what could still be saved. In the end, she did not attack again. She stepped back into the sub-basement and pulled the emergency cut switch, mounted by the stairs. The building lights died all at once. Not just below us, everywhere. The annex dropped into silence so complete it felt staged. By the time Pike and 2 deputies found the stairs with their flashlights, Ruth Reller was gone. No one found a second exit. No one found a body either. The tin box held exactly what my mother had promised. A pocket ledger wrapped in wax paper, 3 cassette copies, a bundle of intake cards with dates that preceded missing persons reports by hours or days, and one side memo routing sealed materials below the annex with the Sheriff Dane Coulter's approval. Pike went white when he saw the signature. Coulter went on medical leave by noon and resigned before the week ended. The public explanation stayed thin. Pike told me only that an outside state investigator took the ledger, the tapes, and most of the Northline files before the county could decide what to call them. The county called the sub-basement an unauthorized historical storage area, which is a sentence I think about more often than I should. It is the kind of sentence institutions build to walk away from themselves. Mara was dehydrated, bruised at the wrists, and angrier than anyone I had ever seen alive. She took 2 weeks off, came back long enough to pack her desk, then transfer 3 counties over without saying goodbye in person. I don't blame her. Pike told me Ruth's house was empty when they searched it. Closet half full, kitchen scrubbed, no computer, no recent mail, the kind of disappearance that looked less like panic than procedure. Kessler was found 6 days later in a storm drainage culvert outside town, alive, hypothermic, unable or unwilling to tell anyone how he got there. Mara said that was the worst part. Not that the boxes had seemed to know, that they had only been mostly right. The annex closed for structural remediation. The rule card disappeared from my desk. So did Ruth's office photograph of my mother. Pike swore he had tagged it himself. I believed him. People ask whether I would sue, whether I'd go public, whether I would move. I did what tired people do when the world has become too strange to confront all at once. I moved into a smaller apartment. I took a records job at a hospital 40 miles away. I stopped working nights. For a while, that seemed like enough. The sleepwalking eased. The dead air calls stopped. If I woke up at 1:13, I stayed in bed until the clock changed. Pike checked on me every few weeks and never once used the phrase, "Are you doing better?" That is one reason I still answer when he calls. As for my mother's tapes, I turned over two. I kept one, not because it was smart, because it ended with her speaking like a mother and not a witness. On that part of the tape, after all the names and dates and supervisor initials, her voice changes, grows tired, human again. She says, "If you're hearing this, I'm so sorry you had to hear any of it at all." Then she laughs once, softly, like she's embarrassed to be caught saying something honest. Then she says, "Some things are only monstrous when they stay unfiled in the dark." I listened to that line every night for months. I still don't know if she meant we survive things by naming them, or if she meant the opposite, that naming them is somehow certain horrors become permanent. Maybe both. I'm telling you this now because something arrived tonight. No courier, no knock. I live on the 3rd floor now, in a building with cameras in the lobby and a deadbolt that throws harder than the one at Mara's old house. I checked both at 9. I checked them again at 10. I made tea. I kept the television on for noise. I didn't have to trust. At 1:13, I heard soft metallic ding from the hallway outside my apartment. Not loud, not electronic, old, mechanical, tired. Exactly like the service lift in the annex. I don't have a service lift in my building. I waited. Maybe that was brave. Maybe I was remembering just how to count to 50. When I opened the door, a gray evidence envelope was standing upright against the welcome mat. No stamp, no sender.